everything starts in the gut. And so I think we're really in for an amazing session here. So Caroline's going to give us a presentation for about 45 minutes. And then at the end is going to take any questions. We were just saying that no question is stupid, so ask anything at all. Probably other people are thinking the same thing. Thanks so much, Caroline. Over to you.
Hopefully you can all see that, I hope. So I call this presentation, the wonderful world of our gut microbiome, and hopefully by the end of this presentation, have a really good understanding about why it just is so important to all aspects of your health and how you can go about supporting your gut microbiome, and your health overall. And just a tiny bit about me, as Sonia's already said, I'm a registered naturopath. I sit on the General Naturopathic Council. I'm a board director there. Nutritional therapist. I've been in practice 15 years now, particularly specialising in gut health. And that's been my main focus, I'd say, for the last 7 or 8 years, because naturopaths have always said health and disease starts in the gut. And science is sort of catching up with that as we'll go through this, and you'll get a bit of an understanding why. I do also have a podcast called Nutrition Life Stories, which you'll find on all the channels. To be perfectly honest, I haven't recorded any this year because it's been too busy. But I've got a few people I want to have as guests, so I need to get back into doing that. But you can find my podcast on all the channels. I've been in corporate management for 20 years before I moved into this realm, and do all sorts of things, one-to-one, mostly one-to-one personalized programs with individuals, going and give talks to corporates, run some retreats, online workshops. And yeah, I really am passionate about what I do and love sharing my knowledge. So I hope that comes about. Now, this isn't actually a very particular, really good diagram, but I just liked a little visual. Because actually, well, yes, it's showing the microbiome and all these little things. And in the area it's showing is sort of like the small intestines, but the bit around the edge is the large intestines and the colon. And really, that's where the large predominant amount of your microbiome should be. Now, what exactly are we referring to here? I'm sure you're all aware that it's this bacteria. But we will also have some viruses and some fungi and even some parasites. And some parasites, it always sounds a bit scary, but some parasites are almost being reclassified on the knowledge that we now have, only certain ones that they may be potentially more beneficial to our health and not really damaging, but some are, of course. And it's really diverse, this ecosystem. That's what we need to think about it. And we do find it from the top to the bottom of the gastrointestinal tract. Most of them are found in the large intestines, the colon. But we do get them, as you'll see on another slide, we actually have our own unique microbiome in our mouth as well. So it is populating from the top to the bottom. Most of them should be in the colon. And these words I've used at the bottom, it's a mutually beneficial symbiotic relationship. We need to take care of them and they will take care of us. So as we go through this, you'll understand, we might think about what we feed ourselves and protein and having good fats, but we need to pay as much attention to our gut microbiome and what they need to try and keep ourselves as healthy as possible. So we do have all these other microbiomes, and it's just this wealth of knowledge that's coming out and research that's going on. We do have microbiomes and other populations throughout our body. You might be aware of having microbiome on the skin because you might have read about certain skin products taking care of the skin microbiome. But we also have these other ones in the oral cavity, the urinary cavity, vaginal, in the lungs, in the skin. And at the moment, it's considered that the gut is like the conductor of the orchestra. It is communicating with all these other microbiomes. The placenta has a microbiome. Around ladies' breasts, there's microbiome when we think about breastfeeding. And interestingly, we know that the oral microbiome will influence the gut microbiome in that direction, because when we think about it, we swallow saliva all the time. So when we're swallowing saliva, depending on the makeup of your microbiome. Are you swallowing potentially pathogenic bacteria from the oral cavity, or actually are you swallowing good ones? And I'll come on and talk a bit about this at the end, but when I do a lot of stool testing with my clients, you can see the presence of oral pathogens in the stool where you wouldn't want them to be. So, I talked about all this research, and boy, has this taken off in recent years. So I was training to be a nutritional therapist. I started in 2005, and because I was still working and had young twins, it took me actually nearly 5 years at the time. And I qualified at the end of 2009, which is the first point on this chart here. Started practicing in 2010. And so you can start to see here, this is just annual publications in the Journal of Microorganisms. Of course, there's lots of other research that may not even get published in major journals. So it begins to give you an idea of just the explosion in the field of research, which I find absolutely fascinating, and why, just as I think I'm learning a lot, I realize how much I still have to learn, and that will just keep happening. And so I have to stay on top of what's going on in this field, just like you may want to as well. So just to give you a little bit of an idea, and you might know some of this information and you might not know, but this is based on today's understanding. As I put there at the bottom, I think tomorrow's understanding will be even more mind-blowing. So it is currently estimated that we have 100 trillion gut microbes, 10 times the number of cells there are in the body. And then we can start to get into the sort of DNA and genetics around this. And if you think about the genetics in our cells and in our body, and then you think of the number of genes that are present in these microbes, you can then start to appreciate just how much of an influence they are having on our overall health. You have more microbes in your own gut than there are people in the world. It's considered to weigh 1 to 2 kilos. And there are 28,000 different species of microbes identified now, currently. We will keep identifying more. Some of these don't even have names yet. They've just got numbers because they're still trying to work out. They haven't got names. Each one of us should have around about, I think really it should be about 200. You may have 150. I have had clients where it's down at 67, which is not considered healthy at all. So we want to be up around 200, 220, maybe 240 with the right ones, from this total population of 28,000 that have been identified. And we do know that some are far more important than others, but it's about the collection and the overall makeup of what those species are. 70% of our immunity starts in the gut. We have lymphatic tissue known as Peyer's patches in our gut that are producing white blood cells, and because these microbes are influencing what is going on, it has a major impact on our immunity. And they now say that 90% of disease can be linked to gut health. That doesn't mean it's completely causative of the disease, but it's definitely influencing it. It's a factor. It may be a major factor or a minor factor. And that's why I think it's so important that you always start with the gut. And it's now considered to be recognized as another organ in the body because it is just so important. So what do these microbes do for us? So in simplistic terms, and we'll talk about this a bit more as we go through it, but these bacteria are fermenting different fibers and they produce things called metabolites. These metabolites are different compounds. Now, these compounds, if they're the good ones, what they're going to do for us is they're going to keep the gut mucosal barrier, this lining, healthy. So when we think about when we swallow food and the microbes that are living in the gastrointestinal tract, in the gut, it's almost like the external world, really. It's not yet in our bloodstream. It's not yet directly influencing us. And what you ideally want, so what you should have, is this gut barrier with a very healthy mucosal layer. And the cells, the epithelial cells sitting behind it, should just have really minute gaps. The only thing that should get through those are completely digested food, and your vitamins and your minerals and your water. Nothing else should get through. So if you've got a gut microbiome that's producing the right sort of metabolites, it's going to keep that gut mucosal barrier really, really healthy to help prevent what is commonly known as leaky gut, also known really as intestinal permeability. You do not want a leaky gut. They are producing metabolites that are going to feed other bacteria. When you think about all these trillions and different types, they're all sort of working together, hopefully in harmony. Some of them are going to produce some types of compounds that's going to help to feed other types of bacteria. So collectively, they're all helping each other. They produce some vitamins, and they can also produce or modulate neurotransmitters. So I'm sure you've heard of the terms serotonin and dopamine, maybe GABA. These are neurotransmitters. They are chemicals that are keeping the brain healthy. When you think about serotonin and people who have a low mood, they may be prescribed serotonin selective reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs. What they do is keeping serotonin circulating in the brain. It's not producing it. Now, what is not clearly understood at this stage is that whilst the bulk of serotonin is produced in the gut, is whether it's actually able to cross that gut-brain barrier. But we do know it's influencing it, these neurotransmitters. So, you know, taking care of the brain, you need to take care of the gut. And as we've already mentioned, it supports this robust immune system. It helps to create tolerance of the immune system and modulate it. It stops the immune system going into overdrive, hopefully. As we come on to see, if it's not really healthy, it can create other problems elsewhere in the body if the immune system is not modulated and under control. They're also going to help regulate gut motility. Now, of course, we need to take care of how we eat in terms of helping motility and avoiding constipation. But we also know that if you don't have the right mix of microbes, then you may end up with more of a constipating picture, or you may end up with a picture where you get very loose bowel movements, diarrhea, urgency, and that type of thing. They help to metabolize bile acids, and without going into sort of the complex science behind this, but you know, bile acids created in the liver, stored in the gallbladder, and you want a certain number of these to actually be reabsorbed back into the bloodstream and go back to the liver, and they go in this sort of circular motion around the body. But if things aren't quite right, you can get to a situation where there's just too many bile acids that are being excreted, and that is certainly a contributory factor for loose stools. Helps to maintain the correct pH. Now, this is pH is to do with the acidic alkaline environment, and by maintaining the correct pH, then it's helping to prevent potential overgrowth of more pathogenic strains of bacteria. And of course, what they're doing is digesting our fiber and these things called polyphenols, which are types of plant compounds, so that they can thrive. Oops. One moment, sorry, press the wrong thing. So I put a diagram here of a car park. You know, what on earth has that got to do with the gut microbiome? And it was once described to me that the gut, particularly the colon, is like a car parking. You know, you've got car parking spaces. You want every one of those spaces ideally filled with the more beneficial, known as commensal types of bacteria, and potentially maybe some yeast and virus and a little bit of these parasites. You don't want an overgrowth and gaps to be created because you're not fueling them properly. You don't want gaps to be created that can allow the more pathogenic strains to take a hold. And that's why I use the term chaos. You know, you get a dysbiotic picture where things are not balanced in the right way, and then chaos can start to occur, and then you may start to get some symptoms. So one of the definitions I did see, and I think this needs a little bit of refining now, Because in simplistic terms, a dysbiosis is this imbalance between the good and the bad pathogens, and it's the word pathogens that really needs to change now. They contribute to, you know, if you've got an imbalance, then they are going to contribute to chronic conditions and ill health, problems not just in the gut but elsewhere in the body. And it's really important to try and understand, when we talk about good, we're talking about really beneficial ones. They're commensal and they lead to positive health outcomes. We've then got the ones that we really know are really quite bad, and they are the true pathogens that we know can cause disease. But you've got this other collection that we all have that are now known as pathobionts. They will be within us, but what we don't want is those to get out of control. But they can lead to negative health outcomes. And really, the question that you may be wondering is, well, what percentage of your microbes fall into each of those categories? And the only way to really know that is, well, to test, but also be aware of your own health. Are you experiencing any niggles within the gut, niggles elsewhere? You know, what might be going on within your own microbiome that may be leading to the sort of imbalance between those three? So I mentioned the word butyrates before. These are the compounds that are produced. So all microbes are going to ferment fiber, and they're all going to produce different types of compounds. This is the sort of the area that I love to really delve into with stool testing. Now, these compounds are either going to be beneficial to the gut and our health, or they're going to have a negative impact on our gut and our health. And when we start to understand these groups of bacteria and the metabolites and compounds they're producing, then you can then start to move into the realms of really understanding how healthy your own gut and your own gut ecosystem is. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of the things I'm looking for in this space is, most of the beneficial ones, what they're going to be producing are known as short chain fatty acids. One of the most common ones that you might have heard of is something called butyrate. Really important short chain fatty acid. You're going to get other ones like acetate and propionate, but they are beneficial because not only are they going to be feeding other good bacteria, helping them all thrive together, but they're also helping to protect the gut's mucosal barrier. You then get more toxic ones, these things called hexa-LPS. LPS stands for lipopolysaccharides, but what it actually means is the more damaging ones produce these LPS compounds on their membranes. When they break down, they start to damage the gut wall. That's what can make the gut become a bit leaky. And then these toxins can get into the bloodstream and have an impact elsewhere in the body. There are also ones that have produced enzymes that can then impact detoxification. There's something called beta-glucuronidase, but basically what it can do, whether you're somebody who may suffer from something like endometriosis or PCOS, you know, it's trying to, we want to excrete a certain amount of estrogen, but if you're not careful, it can be broken down and get reabsorbed back into the bloodstream and then have a knock-on effect, creating too much of an estrogenic effect in the body, for example. Or it can be breaking down drugs that could be reabsorbed back into the bloodstream, which should be excreted from the body. And then you get these gas producers. This has become an area that's quite a lot of you might have heard of. When we start to get what's called like a SIBO type picture that may be going on, an overgrowth of bacteria in the small intestines that predominantly they're going to be producing gas like methane and hydrogen sulfide. Now, they're not necessarily going to be in the small intestines. They can be in the large intestines, but these gas producers are not ones that you want. They can lead to bloating and cramping and discomfort and either lead to more of a constipating picture or more of a loose type of picture that's going on. Some of them are producing histamine, or they may be breaking down histidine in food to histamine, So maybe it contributing to histamine-like reactions in the body. So I don't want you to get too concerned and worrying about all these names. I just wanted you to have a bit of an appreciation why these bacteria are contributing either to more of a health situation or a less of a healthy impact in the body. So I use this word dysbiosis, and I put a little diagram there to break up my slides a little bit of when you start to get this imbalance. I like to think about sort of the slides, scales a bit. So when we get this imbalance going on, when you start to get more of this dysbiotic picture with all these different compounds and metabolites that may be produced, that's when you can start to get a situation of intestinal inflammation, systemic inflammation. This is inflammation affecting other parts of the body because of those toxicities that can get into the bloodstream, creating inflammation elsewhere. This impaired intestinal barrier, this leaky gut situation that's going on, problems with gut motility, things can become too slow, things can become too fast, creating problems going out for people. A lot of people I work with, you know, it's a real disability. If you have problems with your bowel movements and you're worried about going on holiday, you're worried about going out, you need to know where the nearest toilet is. It's a real problem. You could have high levels of circulating hormones. You could have high levels of drugs. And of course, your very typical IBS type symptoms. You know, IBS is a term that doesn't mean a lot to me, and I know it's easy to use those terms, and I know that if you go to the doctor, this is a term that's used, and I know it does have its own classification, but to me the important thing is understanding what the actual symptoms are, because that's when you can start to help people. But you know, these classic IBS symptoms, this bloating, pain and cramping, as I said, you know, constipation, diarrhea, urgency, increased wind, you know, embarrassing situation, and really having a major impact on the quality of people's lives. You know, but what is going on in that microbiome and this imbalance that could be leading to this situation? So, you know, in terms of how this impacts our health, then what has the microbiome and, you know, an imbalance in this microbiome, what health conditions has this been linked to? Well, I'm sure most of you will have heard about the gut-brain axis. I talked about the neurotransmitters that are produced, but just thinking about the microbes and all these different metabolites, not just neurotransmitters, but we know we have this enteric nervous system, and it's this two-way flow of communication between the gut and the brain. You know, for years now, we've all been aware of when we get nervous, we get butterflies in our stomach. If we get nervous, it may lead to loose stools. So we know how the brain is influencing the gut, and we now know the gut is really influencing the brain. And we really need to pay far more attention to what is going in the gut and how it is influencing this explosion of mental health problems that we have today. From low-level depression, major depression, anxiety, children with ADHD and other diagnoses, the neurodivergent, just what is going on in that gut that is contributing to that. IBS I've mentioned, SIBO I've mentioned, when you might get an overgrowth of methane or hydrogen sulfide predominant bacteria that start to take a hold in the small intestines where they shouldn't. And what they do is they start to feed off different types of food that are coming through. They feed off it, they create these gases, and the gases have got nowhere to escape, creating this bloating and discomfort. And men come and see me and say, I feel 7 months pregnant, particularly by the end of the day. IBD, you know, more and more research beginning to show how some of these more pathogenic strains, or some of those pathobionts, if they were allowed to get out of control, can be contributing to these IBD situations and even to bowel cancer. This chronic low-grade systemic inflammation, it is considered today that most people a lot to do with our lifestyle and our diets and our stress, but also the gut, is that we're living with what we call this low-grade systemic inflammation going on in the body. So it might not be that you've got major joint aches and pains, but we've all got little niggles of one way or another. So how much inflammation is really going on in the body that's low grade, that may be coming from the gut? We're aware that chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia has links to the gut. Hormone irregularities, I mentioned, potentially, we know these microbes, that they're known as the estrobolome, which may be breaking down this excess estrogen that's trying to be excreted from the body, and that might end up being reabsorbed back into the bloodstream again. Menopause, we may think that we just want to hang on to all the estrogen, but there's different types that are being detoxified through the liver, and some we don't want to keep hold of. Autoimmune conditions, so going back, I said at the start, about 70% of our immunity, and in the gut, it's helping to maintain what we call immune tolerance. When we've got autoimmune conditions, our immune system is going into overdrive, and then it starts to, the body starts attacking its own tissues. The immune system has lost its tolerance, and it may stem, and there's a lot of research to show that it does stem from the gut and the different types of bacteria there. Skin conditions, I've helped many people with skin conditions, eczema, psoriasis, fungal. I've just recently worked with a little girl, very much, I think, stemmed from the gut, and supporting that. Little girl couldn't sleep, couldn't concentrate at school, affecting her social life, quiet and withdrawn, and she's become a completely different child altogether now. Cardiovascular disease as well, there are links there. Yes, there are links to obesity. They've studied obese people, they've looked at their microbiomes, they've compared it to a sort of more of a healthy cohort of slim individuals, and noticed a different makeup of their gut microbiome. Don't use it as an excuse though, but it's just to be aware there could be a factor. Type 2 diabetes as well. Yes, of course we must take care of our diet, but it could be the makeup of the microbiome is not helping the situation. Again, going back to immunity, you could have poor recovery from infections. Are you one of those people that keep being struck down by infections and you can't recover from it? It takes you ages, and just as you get over it, something else knocks you for six. Sorry, two of these popped up at the same time. I couldn't work out how to change it. Your microbiome is as unique as you are. I said that we can now study our own microbiomes. We should have around 200 different species. Some, common ones we might all have, but we'll all have quite different ones from this 28,000 that have been identified. But we have to go right back through our lifestyles to look at the impact, more to do with the negative impact here, on our microbiome. What factors in our lives have these made, have these been part of your own lifestyle that could be having an impact on your gut microbiome? So let's start with antibiotic use. But I think we're all pretty much aware now, from a medical profession, they don't want to be using them because they're worried about this explosion of not being able to control superbugs. But we know the moment you take an antibiotic, they're antibacterial, they're going to destroy some of your microbiome. It's considered that once you've destroyed some, you'll never get them back again. So, antibiotics, yes, there are times we need them and important, but use them cautiously. As a naturopath, we need to give, our body is amazing, and given the right tools, the right nutrients and the right support, it can recover and get over infections and things. But sometimes we're a little bit too hasty. And whereas drugs are a bit like a magic pill and we can get rid of things very quickly, given time, your body could overcome things. So we do need to think twice about antibiotics. Proton pump inhibitors, and this is to do with your omeprazoles, your lansoprazole. Proton pump inhibitors are lowering your stomach acid. Now, this isn't the space to get onto when and where you should use them or maybe not use them, but they should be used really cautiously. because when we lower stomach acid, it's impacting our first line of defense. Your stomach is meant to be really acidic for several reasons, but when we think about bacteria, I mentioned about swallowing saliva with bacteria in, and some of that saliva and bacteria may be more pathogenic. You want that acid to try and destroy those bacteria. The same with when we swallow food. When we swallow food, we're going to be swallowing bacteria, whether you like it or not. Bacteria is there, it's present, it's everywhere. That stomach acid should be destroying those bacteria, a first line of defense. So if you lower your stomach acid through the use of proton pump inhibitors, you're opening up the door to allow pathogens to survive and get through into the gut. Your genetic inheritance is really important, particularly coming from the mother's side. Your mother is really going to influence your initial makeup of bacteria. We have bacteria through the placenta, for example, and if you're breastfed or not, you're going to be influenced through that as well. But at one time it was considered that baby was born sterile, and that view is changing now. Your birth and early childhood exposure, if you were born through the birth canal, you're going to be exposed to all the vaginal microbiome. If you're born by cesarean, as increasingly children are, and my twins were, and I didn't know all of this at the time, touch wood, they are healthy, then, you know, you're not exposed to all those bacteria. That's so important. Early childhood exposure to dirt, to being handled. Everything has become too sterile. You know, everyone thinks you should use Dettol wipes and wipe everything down. No, we need to expose children to some natural dirt. Let them build up their own microbiome. That's how we're going to develop it. Again, through being breastfed as well. Of course, our diet is hugely influential, as I'm going to come on and talk about. Your lifestyle and travel. Have you picked up bugs through traveling? You know, I've had in the past traveling to India, food poisoning bugs, you know, and as that had a knock-on effect that's been very difficult to overcome. And stress levels, you know, stress is a very difficult one. You know, we live in very stressful lives, but what can we do to try and control our stress levels? So the bit I'm sure you want to know more about is, how do we take care of our gut microbiome? So first and foremost, we have to think about a wide diversity and abundance. Diversity and abundance are the words I use all the time. We have to look at what we're eating, the colours on our plate. How often are we getting plant-based food into our diet on a daily basis? You know, ideally we'd get 10 a day, and that sort of scares people when I say that. But it isn't just about vegetables. It's about some fruit, but be careful with the sugary fruits. It's also about nuts and seeds, herbs and spices. It could be a little bit of whole grain, a little bit of brown rice, things like that. Maybe a tiny bit of dark chocolate because of the polyphenols, but predominantly plants. It does not mean I'm thinking about a vegan diet here, because I'm not, and I'm not vegan. It's just making sure that throughout the day, are you getting enough plant-based food into your diet? And it needs to be diverse. So whilst I've got 10 a day, and that seems a bit scary, you know, start to think about 5 different plant foods a day and build from there. But trying to get 40 different plant foods every week, you know, so when we do online supermarket shops, which I don't do, it's tempting to just put the same old into your supermarket basket every single week. And you're not then getting to the supermarket, or lovely, hopefully a farmer's market, seeing what's fresh, what's in season, and choosing things that you might have not had. You know, the front corner of that slide, which was actually taken in my kitchen a while ago, is fennel. You know, how often are you eating fennel? And, you know, some of these other things, there's red cabbage there deliberately on that picture. There's lots of different colours. So don't exclude anything. You know, cauliflower and mushrooms are just as important as carrots and squash. You've got to feed the rainbow. You want to get as much different variety and colour on your plates every single day, every single week. So a little bit about prebiotics. Now, you might have heard of this word, and increasingly I see it in more and more supplements, the word prebiotic. What that actually means is prebiotics are feeding the bacteria. So it's different to probiotics, which I'll come on and talk about. Prebiotics are feeding them. So some really good prebiotic foods that you can incorporate into your diet, things like garlic and leeks, asparagus, fennel, some oats, chickpeas, lentils, onions. They're prebiotic foods. Now, some people I know struggle with some of these foods. So I'm not saying if you struggle to eat them and if you get bloating from them, then you must go and put loads into your diet. I'm not saying that. Tiny bits here and there, because at the end of the day, we're trying to feed this beneficial bacteria all the time. Crowd out space, remember the car park, crowd out space for the pathogens to not overgrow. And then we think of the word polyphenols. So polyphenols are plant compounds. These are really important to feeding some of our microbiome. Pomegranate, colourful berries, you know, there's an abundance at this time of year. Flax seeds, nuts, plums, rye, olives, red onions. You can see a lot of those are more of the red coloured ones, really, really colourful. There's something called resistant starch. In more recent years, that is a new fibre that was identified, and we know resistant starch cannot be broken down and digested in the gut, and therefore goes on to feed certain types of bacteria. Now, you have to be careful, because at one time we thought, well, if you cook and cool rice, then you could get an overgrowth of bacteria and things growing on it. But it's about how you do it. You want to cook it and you want to cool it quite quickly and freeze it, or put it in the fridge, and then you can eat it. And same with potatoes. This resistant starch feeds other types of bacteria. The point I'm getting across here is there's no one type better than another. They are all doing a different role and a different job in feeding different types of good bacteria. Pectin. I love telling my clients and advising my clients to cook and stew apple. Potentially take the skin off them if the skin is an irritant to you. Add cinnamon, don't add sugar, and keep it in the fridge and just eat a tablespoon of stewed apple. It's really anti-inflammatory to the gut, full of antioxidants, and the pectin is a lovely, lovely soluble fibre that can help regulate bowel movements, feeding bacteria, and pear as well, maybe to a slightly less degree pear, but also really important. Other things that are supportive, fermented foods, but I wouldn't want you to think that fermented foods alone are going to be all you need to do. I would rather personally focus on a food first approach, but these are great. You know, in years gone by, before we had fridges, you know, there would be more fermented foods. So they're all great things to do, but I would just say, choose what you have carefully. Don't get onto the marketing bandwagon with some of these. They can be very, very expensive to buy. Maybe you want to make some yourself. Think about food first, but it's another level of, you know, the fermented foods with the natural probiotics can have a beneficial effect on keeping the gut more tolerant and more regulated. It's not directly really going to feed some of those bacteria though. Bone broth for some people. Bone broth is really, really good because of the collagen and the other nutrients in it for helping this, keeping your intestinal lining really healthy. We need to keep up levels of our good fats. You know, oily fish, rich in essential fats known as EPA, DHA. They're naturally anti-inflammatory. They're supporting those epithelial cells. So all those fats are really good. Curcumin from turmeric and ginger, wonderful natural anti-inflammatories. IBD conditions in India are considered to be vastly lower in Asian countries than in the UK, and part of that is considered to be due to the curcumin, the active compounds in turmeric, and all the wonderful herbs, you know, whether it's rosemary and thyme and oregano. And I know Sonia could talk way more about herbs, but, you know, grow herbs in your garden, add them to your salads and to your cooking and your food. They are all just absolutely wonderful to support the gut bacteria. Now, I just want to talk a little bit about probiotics. Don't worry, I'm getting near the end of my presentation. Are they worthwhile? Again, huge market of probiotics now on the marketplace, and are they worthwhile? I found a couple of statistics here, thought you might find it interesting. So half the adult population, I'm actually surprised it's not more, half the adult population have tried probiotics, and 70% of consumers report minimal or no perceived benefit. Now, you've got to choose the best quality you can buy if you're going to choose them. You don't want ones that are going to have additives and emulsifiers or potentially sugars in them that are going to be detrimental to the gut. I looked online at the Natural Dispensary, where it's an online stockist that sells fantastic products. My clients mostly buy their products through the Natural Dispensary. And I looked online, 261 products currently that fall into the probiotic category. Into these categories of just everyday supportive, maybe high strength. It could be liquid ones, it could be chewable ones, it could be spore-based ones. But the future world of probiotics are when we start to get into the targeted strains. Probiotics can have a transitory effect on helping the gut, so it can help symptoms whilst you're taking them, but they're not considered to take a hold within the gut. They need to survive that highly acidic stomach, the good ones, but they may not take a hold. But the ones that are considered to be really important are the ones in the future world where they're targeted. And sometimes I am specifying probiotics in these different areas, supporting the gut barrier, helping immunity for the gut brain, for oral, urinary, vaginal situations, because these have been well-researched strains that are known to help to rebalance the microbiomes in these particular areas. So the things you want to be careful of, you need to watch your intake, because these foods are really not helping your gut at all. Now, we're not perfect. I'm certainly not perfect. I love chocolate and a glass of wine as much as anybody else, but it's about moderation. It's about, I was going to say that 80-20 Pareto rule, but we need to think more 90-10, but we have to watch sugars. We really need to watch artificial sweeteners. Don't think they're any better. I would much rather a client has a very well diluted cordial, which has some sugar in, than something with artificial sweeteners, the squashes, because I think mostly they're better for you. Watch having refined starchy carbohydrates, especially the refined ones, there's no fiber in them. Of course, some starchy ones are fine. The oats are okay. I'm not saying you take wheat out of your diet completely, but you've got to watch the balance of what you're eating here. Of course, we've all heard about ultra processed foods and processed foods. The more the food is processed, the more you don't recognize the natural ingredients, the more you need to watch your intake of those. Saturated fats, definitely not avoid. Nothing wrong with having some saturated fats. I don't want you to think saturated fat on its own is a bad word. If you want to eat a steak, which has some saturated fat, but we need to limit it and not have over an abundance. And the problem with ultra processed foods, not is there only too much saturated fat, but it's cheap and it's nasty and it's processed and it's full of free radicals that are going to damage the gut. Seed oils, please avoid these. Again, they are really damaging. They're full of free radicals. They don't have a place in our diets at all. That's not the same as eating sunflowers. I'm talking about the seed oils. Beware of snacking. Snacking can slow the whole digestive process down, slow the movement through the gut, stop cleansing action happens between meals. Really important to try and stop a build-up of bacteria in the small intestines. Beware nanoplastics. Watch using plastic bottles and plastic packaging. Don't wrap cheese and things in cling film. Nanoplastics in seafood, no, you can't avoid it all. It's just having a bit of an awareness. Yes, non-organic is more likely to have some, but again, they are finding some of these in some of our foods. Can't avoid it. Can't just go completely organic. I recognize that. Just having a little bit of an awareness, you might want to research that yourself. And I mentioned anti-suppressant medication. We talked about stress. anything you can do to try and calm the stress response. We want to get ourselves out of the sympathetic fight or flight mode as much as we can and into the parasympathetic rest and digest phase. So any of these things, anything that works for you, that's the important thing. There's no point trying to lie on the floor and meditate if it just makes your brain wander all over the place and make you feel more stressed. Find something that works for you, incorporate them into your day-to-day life, do some deep breathing. And I especially think it's important to do deep breathing and try and calm yourself before you start eating to really support digestion. So just, I thought I'd do a little bit just before I finish here about the testing I now use in my practice. This is the latest test on the market. It's only been available in the UK for about 6 months. I was asked to be a pioneer in the UK to bring this test to the market. They can now test the entire gut microbiome from 28,000 species, of which you should have hopefully about 200. Through this company called Microbiome, the Meta Explore test. It uses next generation sequencing, so it can look at your entire microbiome, no second guessing at all, identifying those pathobionts, those pathogens, the parasites, potentially looking at intestinal inflammation, systemic inflammation, leaky gut. And it is giving and provides me with really clear, actionable answers, and not guesswork at all, that you can then help people, I can help people work forward with. So if you want to know more about me, there's a QR code if you wanted to join my newsletter. I send advice out every week with offers, different news. I mentioned earlier on my Nutrition Life Stories podcast, but I also have a YouTube channel with about 400 or 500 videos on there that I started at the beginning of 2020, before COVID and lockdown, for several years. I do the odd one now, but I've got a substantial catalogue of videos, roughly 20 minutes long. Some are short snippets, all sorts of advice and information you can find there. So please go and subscribe. You can join my Facebook group, and I'm on Instagram as well. And that's my website, peytonprinciples.com. So that's my QR code. And thank you very much.
Well, I mean, that's just been amazing, Caroline. I can't believe how much you've covered in an hour. It was a real whistle stop, but you know, everything's there and lots of food for thought, and things that people can go away and think about. And everybody now knows where to find you. I mean, I just think you're such a wealth of knowledge on this particular area that there's no reason for people to be struggling in this area. There's really is the help out there, and people should, you know, find a way to access it. So thank you again for coming and doing this for us today. It really has been
my pleasure,
highly informative, and can't thank you enough.